Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'll just do the usual bit of housekeeping before we get started. So if we're recording, so if you'd like to just keep yourself muted throughout, and to ask any questions, if you want to use the chat facility, we won't have an awful lot of time to ask questions live because we want to give every artist as long as possible to talk. So if you have specific questions for the artist, just type them into chat, and then when they've finished speaking, they'll then type the answers back to you. Tonight we've got 4 sculptors, and I'll now hand over to Charlie Leeson, who's chairing tonight's event. Charlie is the vice chair of the RSA Development Committee and comes to us tonight from Ascent. So welcome, Charlie.
Thanks, Sheena. So welcome everyone to this, the 3rd Open Studios event, which is dealing with painting. The 4 painters that you're going to hear tonight have all been chosen by Adi Adesina, and they've got work in the exhibition. We've got Catherine King, Barry Mccouslin, James Sinfield and Benjamin Sullivan, and they'll be letting you into their studios and talking about their practice. So thanks so much for the 4 of you for agreeing to do this. And let's crack on to give you as much time as possible. So the first artist I'd like to introduce to you is Catherine King. She graduated from Duncan of Jordanston in 1983 and has exhibited both in the UK and overseas. She currently combines lecturing in contemporary fine art at Forth Valley College with her own work, drawing, painting and printmaking. Her inspiration is found in the beauty of the Scottish landscape, intertwined with a sense of belonging and family. In addition, she's been exploring feminist themes in modern media, including the perception of beauty. So over to you, Catherine.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me in my studio in Falkirk. I'm very fortunate to have had this studio built for me when we came to this house about 20 years ago. I'm especially pleased to have this portrait of Richard DeMarco and Terry Newman included in this year's RSA Open Exhibition. I met Richard many years ago probably as a student, but was really rather nervous of making my acquaintance with him, and reconnected with him in fairly recent times. And Terry Newman was actually my original subject for a portrait. Never painted a portrait ever since I graduated from art school. I'd never painted a self-portrait, and I had a little thing about painting or drawing 60 women for my 60th birthday to just dispel the notion that I had to work through. I hadn't intended that Richard would be situated in his own studio. I'd intended an oak forest in homage to Joseph Beuys, his great friend. And when I went to sketch him in the studio at Summerlee, I just could not have him any other place except there. And Terry had to be included. They are such warm human beings, not even thinking about their contribution to art, but the warmth that you get from Richard sitting, drawing him. You felt like you were the centre of his attention, and Terry has some of that same quality of making you feel really comfortable. Lockdown for me and for everyone else has been really difficult. So I want to move on to my virtual holidays. I had a cancellation of a holiday to Italy at least 4 times. And so I decided I'd take myself there. I've been on numerous occasions and had a wonderful time. So I want to show you this painting of Girasoli in Tuscany. And I just took myself to that hillside beside the road, sitting under an umbrella, temperatures in the 40s, or in an air-conditioned car if I really couldn't cope any longer. And I did some little watercolours. And from that watercolour came this painting. And this is the process that I use for any plein air painting or any landscape that I might produce. I ideally want to have been there, and the business of sitting and looking and enjoying where you are and feeling the temperature, the wind, the colour, everything that's there makes it really important for me. So I did a series of lots of little paintings of Italy from my sketchbook, and have actually, probably the sketches for that were 2012, and I've only now actually put them oil on canvas. I've got here a little sort of group of sketchbooks. They come with me wherever I go. I do rather like squares, and I particularly love this Fabriana Sketchbook, which they've discontinued. It came in lots of lovely colours, which were superb for taking out pen drawing quite often for speed. I enjoy a gig. My son's a musician, and so I will take a sketchbook with me and enjoy watching tango dancing, all sorts of different things. I do keep going off at tangents, you know, I do have done this all my life, so I see the connection between each thing, and it's what's important to me at the time. This little end of the studio is, I can think of as my winter end. It's got a cosy radiator, I've got my chair, I've got books, I keep my publications down here, and I spend lots of time in the winter in this little corner. And sometimes I make a nest for myself. The palette will come in, there'll be something with reference material sitting on it, and I just make a nest for myself, which I've got to kind of come in and out. The sink came from the Barrows. I'm very proud of this sink. It's exactly £15 from the Barrows, and the architect was utterly horrified when he saw it to be put into my studio. Printmaking has been a big part of my career, and at one point I wasn't really painting at all, apart from my sketchbook watercolours. And more often than not, I was etching, I was making polygraphs, silkscraping, all sorts of different things invaluable to me in my teaching. I have been lucky enough to teach possibly thousands of students how to make an etching, and I think that process that Rembrandt used, it's wonderful to impart that to have people who've born in the digital age drawing and using aquatint to make prints. I never really think about the back to front thing. If it's going to work one way, it'll work the other as a composition. However, if it's a real place, this is stacks on Handa. If I can just hold that up a little bit. So it's a proof of an etching stacks of Handa, and you'll see that it's back to front. So I did flip that, the sketch that I made, it came directly from the sketchbook, and I flipped it on Photoshop. So using technology is not something that I mind doing, but it didn't matter which way around it went. I would simply draw the thing that I was interested in. And I've been recently working on some larger plates. Now, coming around the studio again, the watercolour on the wall, which is then going to lead into this small study in oils. And then we come to the mad portrait of Catherine. Elizabeth Louise Villiers-Lebrun currently has a painting on show in the National Gallery in London. And a friend sent this to me saying, you know, is this how you dress up in the studio? So I got myself a hat and a stole, and just for fun sent a picture of that to him. And then later on, when I was thinking about it, I've avoided a self-portrait. I have never put myself in the position of staring at myself in a mirror, and not because I'm not vain, but because it's just not something I needed to do. And I had a great old time making this particular portrait. My palette doesn't always live in this corner. I tidied up in just for you, but it's the most fabulous palette I think I've ever had. It's a kitchen bench from, you know, that well-known Scandinavian furniture maker, and a huge 60 by 60 centimetre ceramic tile on top. And I do have the old-fashioned ones, which are used on other occasions, but you know, this is a great height for me. I can perch on a stool, I can stand, and I only need to bring out one of the little ones for the, you know, something that I need low level. If I've put them on the wall to finish them, which I've done with these double canvas pieces. My first portrait that I did of remarkable women that I knew and I was privileged to know was Leeson, who was a huge influence in my life, and her work was always familiar to me. She taught for Forth Valley College, or then Falkirk College, when I had my first teaching job ever. And so I've known her for all of those years. I'm not going to quite count how many. And I drew her also in her own studio. And I was trying to think what the background of that would be. And so again, I wanted her immersed in one of her own paintings. So this is all about family. And Lisa's work is so much wrapped up in family that I felt it was exactly right. And I had great fun, you know, trying to put that painting in place without it actually being a copy of her painting. And she was posing in this little chair and so much herself. So this is my studio. I hope I've explained something about my practice. The teaching happens up this end at the minute, and sharing screens and big screens so I can see what students are doing is very important. But my potting shed is not quite ready, so it's currently doubling up as a greenhouse come potting shed. So thank you very much, folks. Oh, and I also wanted to mention Scotland in 4 Seasons. And one of the things that came about through COVID was, you know, keeping in touch with people. And Scotland in 4 Seasons is a new magazine, and I'm really pleased to say that they're featuring my landscapes in their summer edition. So I hope you can all have a look at that. And thank you so much for listening to me this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it.
That's great, Catherine. Thank you very much. Don't forget, audience, if you want to ask any questions, if you do that in the chat, and Catherine will pick them up later on. The next person I'd like to introduce to you is Barry Mccouslin. Barry's an abstract artist designer based in Glasgow. He studied graphic design and history of art and works mostly from small pen drawings, which he works up into acrylic paintings, combining layers of paint with Posca pens to achieve the final intricately worked result. He said that art to him is a form of brain containment and closure, a form of healing and meditation. So Barry, over to you, and tell us more, please. Thank you.
Good evening, folks. Thanks very much for asking me to be included in this. It's really quite a privilege. So I don't really know where to start sometimes. My wife says when I start to try and describe it, I get myself into all sorts of trouble. But I'll start from you know, what I do, what I don't do, and how I kind of get inspiration. So I'll share my screen with you folks, and maybe give you an idea of where I kind of start. I love to use, you know, fine black tip pens, and the kind of things that I come up with is usually kind of basic, very basic shapes. This image that I've got on screen just now, I hope you can see it, is possibly about 10 centimetres by 10 centimetres. But from that, I'll flip that into all different directions. What I tend to do is my brain thinks in like copy and paste mode, if you want to think about a computer. So I'll copy, paste, skew, thinking 360 degrees. And what I like to do is maybe try and get a face somewhere along the lines. When I'm out and about, I tend to see things that remind me of faces. To give you an idea of what I'm talking about, this is an image from the underground down in London. And what I tend to do is I go everywhere with my iPhone. I don't go anywhere without an iPhone and my small pen. And what I tend to do is I muck with the settings in the iPhones to get something that I quite like the look of. Now in this one up here, you know, these are like studies, these are like sketches. But basically there, whether other people see it or not, I don't know. But I kind of see two eyes there, and I see what appears to be like a nose, and I see what appears to be, what could quite easily become a mouth with the steps. That tends to happen wherever I go. I love wandering about cityscapes. I love watching people. Although I wouldn't say I actually photograph people and try and draw anything from that. I work up a lot of things into what I would call kind of the art collage. I don't know if you can see behind me in the back right there. There's kind of infinite collage. So over the last 10 years, this is about 10 years worth of work. The one I've put into the Royal Academy, but there's about 10 years worth of stuff here. So essentially what I've got is I'm very methodical, very obsessive. So basically what I do is I've got a kind of, a dirty inbox, and I kind
Sorry, excuse me, if you stop screen sharing, we can get a better view of you.
All right, okay, so I will stop there. So, sorry guys. So if you can see in the background, this is collage. This is accident, because obviously I don't start off trying to get that. In the collages, these are like small images. I always do boxes, triangles. It's just very basic lines, but they're done with very, very fine tip pens. So like even that wee section can take a couple of hours, depending on how big the section is. So there's probably and amongst that there just now, there's probably a couple of hundred wee drawings. They're not refined. That's the unrefined box. That's a more refined box. So I like the idea. I was bored. I used to work in an office, and it was a horrendous experience, to be honest with you. I spent nearly 20 years in an office, and I didn't like it, but I learned quite a lot from it. And some of the things, like inboxes, outboxes, I tend to have kept to that kind of way of thinking. But it's my way of processing it. So if you think for the way I operate, I'll work from pen. I'll work them up into smaller images, cut the images up, reset the images. Often these collages have been redone many times. They've took various guises, and then from that, what I tend to try and do is I'll try and find like an image which I'm comfortable with or which I like. Well, in fact, there's one in the background. If you can see the one in the back wall there, you'll kind of always, I know it's kind of abstract and hard to see, but there is a kind of eye up there. I like to think of that as a nose coming down. There's the kind of half eye up there. All these wee boxes, I like to think of that as the kind of, the individual thoughts in your mind. I'd spoke before to somebody about Kim Peake. He was the man that inspired the movie Rain Man, and things that interest me are like the infinite things that you can't really put into words really, and for me that guy's particularly interesting because he was classified as brain damaged, essentially no use to anybody. I think that was his own words in the documentary I watched. Yeah, he read somewhere in the region of 12,000 books and retained about 90% of everything he ever read. So things like that I'm interested in. I'm very interested in that. I tend to think that what makes you wake up one morning and remember a dream from when you were a kid, it's like it seems impossible, but sometimes it happens. So that interests me quite a bit. As this, when I started college many years ago, I didn't really know how to use a computer, and the lecturer explained how the computer works, and it's all these drawers. Imagine an electronic or digital filing system. And I think these boxes tend to come from there. These, as I said, I've probably got some in the region of about 30 to 50 of these at various stages. These are meter paintings. These are other ones here. If you can see that as well. I think the eyes in that are slightly more defined. The colours come from pop art. It was the first thing that caught my imagination at school. I love drawing, I love doodling. I don't really stop mucking about with a pen, but it was the colours that sparked my imagination. What I'm also in the process of doing is creating I said this before, I like digitising all my paintings. So I'm going back to Adobe Illustrator, which I've not really touched it for nearly 25 years since I left college. And I thought, right, I'm going to have a wee look into Adobe Illustrator. And if you can see my screen, I'm in the process of creating a palette, you know, which I'm kind of calling it the Posca paint palette, you know, or the pop art palette, whereby, you know, I kind of know where I stand, you know, and the obsessive part to my character kind of likes that, it likes working within certain constraints. So just to give you an idea of what I'm doing next, because I do like to do things in stages, and this might be another year's worth of work or 2 years worth of work, but these images here that you're seeing are essentially replications of paintings. Now, when you scroll in, obviously there's quite a bit of detail, but on the original paintings I was doing, that original detail was there with pen. You know, I would work up layers of acrylic paint and work that up and then work into it with the pens. So now kind of what I'm doing is digitizing that, which I'm finding quite therapeutic as well, because it's a change from paintings that were taking me maybe 100 hours, you know, literally maybe more in many cases. So it's nice to be more spontaneous, because I've tried that. I've tried to work on a spontaneous basis. It doesn't work for me. It looks rotten. Anytime I try and do something quickly, it's just not good. So I like to think that a lot of these things are just accidents, you know, and I've got a wee line here just to say everything is chance, luck, and accident. And I believe that that's the way I think about my art. I don't think about it in any other context. It gives me something to think about. It helps me get through the day, etc. I read an article as well a few years ago, and I've kept a wee note. It was a Guardian article about IKEA furniture, and Catherine, you quite nicely mentioned IKEA. We all love a bit of IKEA, but the boss spoke about furniture saturation in modern civilized Western societies, which I thought was quite interesting. So I thought, you know, God, do you only want to put out so much stuff into the ether? Because imagine in like a billion years' time when we've got all this more stuff out there, there's got to be a limit. But that kind of ties in with the slow nature of the way I work. I've never really been knocking out loads and loads and loads of stuff. I would say there's about 10 years and there's maybe 100 artworks by the time I get to my exhibition this year. There might not be, there might be less than that by the time I have a relook at some of them. So process colours are always bright. You know, somebody asked me, you know, how do you get the colours? I just like bright colours, so I'll start mixing up colours. Often what I'll do is I'll have my wee jam jars, and I'll go from there. And I hate to lose or misuse any paint, so I'll just kind of form a kind of lineage, if you like, and say, right, okay, well, I'm down there, let's add some more in. But they tend to always be bright. For the last 10 years, they have always been bright. They've not been dark. That was based on my wife's recommendation that the paintings were far too depressing prior to that, so none of the paintings actually exist anymore, which is maybe a good thing. And a final point, you know, I'm interested. Mentioned before, I'm interested in chance, and one of that is that I quite liked was a guy called Hans Art, and one of his artworks was arrangement according to the laws of chance, whereby he just chops up maybe a drawing in bits of paper and lets it come down, and there's something in that I really quite like. So I don't really know if I've got too much else to say. Art for me, it helps me get through the day. It helps me navigate and understand life up to a point. And I'm trying to put it into words, which is very difficult for me, and my wife will maybe give me out of trouble when she hears this. Maybe I've rabbited on too long, so hopefully that explains some of the stuff. The black lines, incidentally, round about the art and the paintings, the black lines I kind of use as a form of rubber. The black lines are an ink rubber as such, and they hide quite a bit of mistakes, so if there's something I don't like, the black comes in, and that's quite useful for that. So there you are, folks. Do I have any more images to share? I had other things, let me see. Why? So these are the kind of grades of pens I use. I've got the...
Just a final one, Barry, that's great.
Was that us? No, that's fine.
Just carry on, show us your pens and then we'll...
Yep, so I use the various grades of Posca pens, and I use photographs like this Usually I'll catch something. It's not really the guy there I liked, it's more the actual shop front that I liked, and he just got in the way. But that I dig that. There's going to be a painting will come from that one and that one at some point. But I've got hundreds of these kind of images, you know, just things I see. But thank you very much for inviting me and allowing me to speak. Thank you.
No, it's great. Thank you. That was really interesting. Thanks very much. Can you stop screen sharing now? And
yes,
then,
I will.
yeah, it's all right. Thanks. Great, super. So the next artist I'd like you to meet is James Sinfield. James is an Edinburgh-based artist who was formerly a theoretical physicist and an ironmonger. His work, which might be painting or photography, is inspired by the Anthropocene and the philosophy of maths. And if you don't know what the Anthropocene is, it's the geological time period that in which man has a significant influence on the surroundings that we have. Recent work is inspired by the edgelands, those spaces that inhabit the boundary between country and town, often unloved functional spaces which have gone through many iterations in the past. Really interesting sort of ideas here. So James, over to you.
Great stuff. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and yeah, a very warm welcome to everybody. Welcome to my studio. So yeah, I'm an Edinburgh-based painter. That was an excellent introduction, actually, because that means I don't have to explain what the Anthropocene is or what the edgelands are. So you've definitely saved me a job there. Okay, so what I'd like to do first, I think, is to share with you the piece which is in the Royal Scottish Academy Open Exhibition. So this is it. It is called What Next, Little Man? It's 60 centimeters squared, it's on board, and it's mixed media. So precisely what I mean by mixed media, I think I'll sort of go into that in a little more detail when I show you around the studio. I'll sort of, it's a real shame that the exhibition this year isn't a live exhibition, because this, like so many other works of art, kind of needs to be seen in the flesh. It has a lot of texture and structure and three-dimensionality to it. So yeah, anyway, I'll talk more a little bit about that. I should just say this is actually based on a visit to a disused hospital here in Edinburgh, a visit that I made in 2017. And to get there, I jumped over a few fences, took some sketches and some photographs as well. And 3 years later, I turned it into this, and well, actually a series of paintings. So that's What Next, Little Man. So before I give you a tour of the studio, what I'd really like to do is to talk a little bit more about my my influences and my inspiration. And Charlie's already given a little bit of a teaser as to what that is. It's the edgelands. So I wanted to show this one just so you can see, firstly, how to spell my name, and secondly, how to find my website. So that's jamessinfield.com. You can also find me on Instagram if you are interested. So yeah, I'd like to just say a few words about the edgelands. And what I'll do is I'll just flick through relatively quickly through a few photographs of that I've taken over the last few years of what I think really sort of typifies the edgelands. So yeah, as kind of the name suggests, these are the places on the outskirts of towns and cities that you know, we often pass through without really noticing. They don't have the culture that one finds in a city, nor the traditionally accepted ideas of beauty that you find in the countryside proper. And this one here has got real kind of archetypical edgeland furniture here. We've got a palette, we've got concrete, and we've got pioneer nature bursting through. And so the edgeland, it kind of provides us with the things that we need to live in an urban environment, the inputs and the outputs. And yeah, more edgeland furniture here, burnt out car and a man-made hill. So you find things like substations and sewage plants and transport hubs and out-of-town retail parks in the edgelands. You find pylons and bings and highly functional buildings and fences, lots and lots of fences. Sometimes these fences can be jumped over or climbed through, and other times they really, really can't be climbed over. So I love the edgelands. I love how nature doesn't care, and I love how I feel like it's not entirely clear if I'm allowed to be there. And so this feeling of wrongdoing. So I try to create a tension in my paintings. And part of that is about the feeling of wrongdoing I have when I'm in these kind of areas. This is one of my favorite edgeland locations on the outskirts of Edinburgh. I love it how the strata of how humans have used and abused the land can be read in the edgelands as well. Okay, so just quickly, the next few photographs are of my time as the artist in residence at Edinburgh's sewage plant. And this is like absolutely archetypical edgeland place. You know, it is literally dealing with the outputs of living in a city. And it provides, I just love being there. This is one of the fences that I couldn't jump over. So I actually requested access, which they very generously gave me. And yeah, I just love the kind of the geometries that come, the accidental compositions that are around there. So yeah, it's about, for me, the edgelands is about, you know, what it means and how it reflects how humans live. But also these geometries and compositions are something that primarily find their way into my paintings. So I'll just talk you through a few of my paintings. So this one you've already seen. This is What Next Little Man, done last year. And, you know, it's quite representative. You know, you can kind of tell what it is. There's a wall, there's a fence, there's a lamppost, there's some double yellow lines. This is kind of one end of the spectrum of what I do. The other end is kind of more abstract, and it kind of looks like this. So this is another one from last year. This was from my time as the artist in residence at the airport. So this one's called Ramdeuter Number 1, Archimedes Screw. And the way I make this one, so I've got my ground that I spend a long time making. And on top of that, I spend time in a location. I work up a visual language. I look for characters, motifs, and geometries, and create a composition based on the things that I found in a particular location. So this is one of quite a big series, actually, of things that I made at the airport. And then this one's kind of a halfway house between the two. So on this one, you've got the kind of the perspectival representative parts, but you've also got the sort of the surface elements, which are based on geometries that were found at this particular location. So this one's called Will Patrons Kindly Refrain? And a friend, a fellow painter, said of my work that it kind of reminds him simultaneously of a map and also of the thing that the map is representing. And I really like that description, and I hold it in my mind when I'm working. Okay, so I'm just going to flick relatively quickly through a few other completed works before I give you a tour of the studio. That's an airport one, as is that. Okay, so I'll stop sharing my screen and show you around the studio. Okay, so down here, this is where I do much of my painting. So I work on the flat because I like the way that I can kind of manipulate paint around on the flat in a way that it just wouldn't work on an easel. And I wanted to show you this one. So this is the one that I showed you before. This is Ramdeuter, and this is a completed work. And so I wanted to say something about mixed media. So when I say mixed media, basically I've got an idea in mind and I just use whatever tools I can find to make the marks. So on this one, there is acrylic paint. I use quite a lot of acrylic paint, but there's also collage. There are pencil marks, so graphite, there's ink, there's spray paint. Well, one thing that I really like using is a homemade paint. So I use something called distemper, and distemper it's glue mixed with pigment. So this is rabbit skin glue. So this needs to be warmed up. This is the dry version. It needs to be watered down and heated up and then mixed with a pigment. And it's literally the simplest and one of the oldest ways of making paint. And I just really love it for a few reasons. Like every paint has got its own way of working, and the different ways in which you can manipulate it. And distemper's got a really beautiful quality. It's very opaque, it's very matte, and it's got a beautiful texture as well. And it dries very quickly, and then you can scrape it off. And I do a lot of that. I do a lot of like adding on paint and then taking it off. And the other reason I like it is it's a link to really ancient painting. So glue mixed with pigment is like the oldest form of paint. That, if you think of the caves in Lascaux, the cave paintings, they would have used something similar. Okay, so that's what I mean by mixed media. Sorry, going back to this one, the ground on which I paint is a really important part of it. So I'm really inspired by people like the suprematists, the constructivists, and they leave a lot of blank space. And so I want my backgrounds to be, my grounds to be really sort of structured, interesting, textured things. So I spend a long time sort of developing them. So what I do first, I paint on boards. So these are plywood boards that have been reinforced. I make these myself, and I start with kind of an expressive underpainting. I use a really limited palette. So these are two colors that I use: Prussian blue, yellow ochre, and then some reds. So I use, in terms of the colors that I use, the non-neutral colors, it's really limited. And I start with a really expressive painting. And I'm not necessarily thinking of the geometries at this point, the geometries, the locations, but interesting things start to happen. Now, on top of that, I will start to add much quieter colors, and they would be like whites and umbers and blacks, so neutral colors. And then I will paint on top of the underpainting. And this is a ground that I've been working on for some time. But this is an iterative process. So this can happen many, many times. And so to get a completed ground can take weeks, sometimes months of work. And I'm not only working on this, so I work on many pieces simultaneously to get the final ground. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is to move around the studio a little bit. So over in this corner over here, these are some completed works. And just here, so this is my clean table. So I try not to do any painting here. So yeah, sketching, and when I'm doing printmaking, it's kind of useful to have a clean area. And then continuing the motion round. So over here, this is my easel, and where I have my works in progress. So the process is quite similar, actually. So when I've got the ground, which is completed, then I start to add geometries to them based on whatever project I'm working on at the moment, whether it's the airport, the sewage plant, or something else. So these are two pieces that I'm working on at the moment, and it's the same kind of process. So I'm adding layers, and then quite often I'm taking those layers off. But of course, depending on which paint I'm using, when I scrape the layers off, there's always some marks that remain behind. So my paintings have kind of got a layered, so palimpsest quality to them. And yeah, I don't know how these are going to go next. So my pieces, they spend a lot of time on the easel. So the function of my easel is that I can look at my pieces to decide what the next step is. And yeah, when these ones are eventually finished, I don't know if any of these particular geometries, these particular marks will even be visible. But that is what they look like at the moment. So I'm sort of playing around with different things. So not only using lots of different materials, but also I'm sort of, everything's an experiment. So these marks here, these are by adding ammonia to paint, which just completely dissolves and denatures the boundary, the binder, to get some really interesting marks. Oh, and I also sometimes add things that I find in the edgelands into the paintings as well. So again, they've got this kind of three-dimensional quality. Yeah, okay, so I think that's probably my time up. So thanks very much for joining me in my studio.
Thank you, James. That was really interesting. Yeah, it's just getting an insight into how you work is just really valuable, and that's one of the best things I like about these open studios. So finally, oh, before I forget, if you want to sort of put any comments in for the artists, any questions, don't forget the chat at the bottom of your screen. Yeah, finally, but not least, I'd like to introduce Benjamin Sullivan. Benjamin's best known for his portraiture. He studied at Edinburgh University, graduated at Edinburgh College of Art, and he graduated in 2000. He's the recipient of numerous awards, including a Kinross Scholarship. And he was the youngest person to be elected to the Royal Society of Portrait Painters. He's exhibited widely and has worked in numerous public and private collections, including the RSA, the National Portrait Gallery, and several Oxford and Cambridge colleges. So over to you, Benjamin.
Hi there. Well, thanks for that introduction, and welcome to my studio here in Suffolk. it's a kind of little studio, so the tour won't take very much time at all. I'm actually just got rid of some paintings actually yesterday, because we hung the Royal Society of Portrait Painters exhibition yesterday in London. It is an actual exhibition, remember those? It's going ahead. But what it's afforded me to do is actually get on with some of the other projects that I have on the go. So I thought I'd start with this relatively blank canvas. This is a new sort of family portrait that I'll be doing in the coming weeks. And it's really just to show you, how I start. So I always work, like James was saying, the ground is very important. So I always work on a kind of greenish ground, and always do a very sort of highly finished drawing beforehand. So I've got a lovely collection of works on paper that of all the sitters that I've painted, to be honest. So this is the very start of this one. This will eventually be a family of 4. The wonderful thing about doing a drawing first is that you can really get the drawing right before popping it on the canvas, and then start painting there. I've got to hurry up on this one actually, because the first painted sitting is on the 13th. So I'll move around slightly to my sort of very professional watercolor station, which is actually on a Z bed. It's here for someone was staying, and it's remained there. But this is another commission that's just started. This is actually for the National Portrait Gallery, and actually I'm just doing some studies to kind of decide how I'm going to sit the individual. So I'm just working through some watercolor ideas there. And carry on up. These are 2, like say, a pair of Hattersleys, a pair of Roy Hattersleys. And these came about because a few years ago I was artist in residence at the Reform Club. I was essentially there doing sketches of members and, recording the club life, etc. And he's a member there. And some of them I worked up into paintings, if they're interesting characters. And he was certainly a good sitter. Now, the kind of poetry behind it, believe it or not, was we're both Sheffield lads. So I thought there might be some connection there. And of course, when I turned up for the sitting, I said, I'm a lifelong Sheffield United fan. And he said, well, if I've known that, Ben, I want a bloody well turned up. So I think the thing I like about it is, because he's such a big corpulent bloke, the idea of having such a small painting, I think, quite worked. That was the first one. And then another one just of the head and shoulders. So if we move around a bit. So this is a painting, obviously, of H.M. the Queen. So this was really my first the first project of Lockdown Mark 1. I've been commissioned to do this, well, to paint her in 2018. And this was essentially the first go that then remained in my studio unfinished forever, just not having time to finish it. So the actual piece is in the RAF Club in London on Piccadilly. So, I mean, Lockdown 1, all sittings were cancelled. And so this really afforded me the opportunity to sort of finish this off, which was great. So she remains there in the studio. If I move around here a bit. So I think at the end of Lockdown 1, I think like everyone, just absolutely desperate to get out the house, kind of remembering that feeling. So I had a summer of really embarking on, a period of just doing plein air painting, which I've not done such a sustained period of time anyway, for a long time. But I was kind of going out in the Essex, Suffolk, Cambridgeshire countryside, and even down to the New Forest where my wife and I are from, and doing various kind of little studies that you see here scattered about. I've also got this Parisian scene I've just fished out the other day because someone's bought it, hurrah for me, so I've got to find a frame for that. I was actually there in 2012 doing a portrait of someone else, and hired this nice flat in Montmartre with a particularly nice view for that purpose, and that's the last of those scenes that I had lying around actually. And I've also got the obligatory lockdown self-portrait. I mean, almost unrecognizable, I'm sure. That rubbish haircut and beard. That my wife loved the beard actually, but my mum hated it. So anyway, it's not there anymore. So that's that. Now, if I move around a bit here, so there's a few more queens here. I did several actually to just, you know, to get to know the face. So there are a few knocking about, but the one I wanted to show you in particular is this one of this is the musician Jack Bruce. It's a bit of a hero painting actually, really, because I was a huge fan of his and still am. You know, I have all his sort of albums. But the nice story, and the reason why I did it essentially, was that we moved to this house in 2007, and Jack turned up actually in his massive Bentley outside, which was quite strange. And he was visiting a kind of, well, my next door neighbour. I probably go no further than that in this particular forum, but he certainly came round a bit, and we got to know them quite well. And so that painting sort of remains there next to the Queen. You know, I wonder what they talk about. It's the thing. I'll just move down slightly to move down. These are my two works in the RSA exhibition. But really, these were that they both show the job centre in our town, and you know, I like the kind of social commentary. But also there's something particularly about that facade that's just fascinating. You know, none of the other buildings quite do it for me in the way that does. So I've painted it, you know, sort of 3 or 4 times, always that building. And this was really what I did, you know, at the start of this year. I've done a lot of oil painting in the year previously, and just fancied, you know, kind of doing something different. And watercolor, you know, change of medium often does freshen things up. So I did these two, and then thought, let's do some portraits in watercolor as well. And so this one is a portrait of a chap called Richard Parks. He was and still is, the head porter at the Garrick Club in London. And they commissioned me to do an oil painting of him in 2019. And obviously he's a great sitter, you know, great, fantastic looking guy. In his green livery. So I spent some time just doing watercolors from old paintings that I'd done, and they didn't feel like copies actually, because, you know, you have the difference of, you know, different in size, different in medium. There's no background. You know, I kept them on the white paper, so it felt quite fun to be doing that. I did sort of 3 or so of them there. So I'll just show you, basically I'll finish off by showing you the portraits that were in the studio that have left to go on exhibition in London. So I'll just do that now. You can share screen. Okay, so the thing about these, the odd thing actually was that they're all, I noticed halfway through, they're all posthumous portraits. And they're all, you know, sort of going back through my archive due to sittings still being suspended. So I was going back through the archive, seeing which really strong drawings I had that could be worked up into paintings that I'd wanted to do at the time, but hadn't quite, you know, had the time available. So this is a chap called Roger Cam. He was the common room assistant at All Souls College, where I was artist in residence in 2009-10. I was doing this large triptych. Took 3 years actually, but the wonderful thing is I have drawings of all these people as well. It makes it's a lovely collection in its own right, really. And Roger is here. He's on the right of the central panel. That's the last thing I've done really. The second one in this kind of body is SS Prava. He was Secret Prava. He was a real sort of doyen of the Oxford Modern Languages department. And I did him at the same time as the All Souls project. It wasn't part of that project, but I was commissioned by Queen's College, which is next door, to do a drawing of him. And he had such style, you know, and such an amazing face to paint that or draw at that time. Was, you know, I would have done a painting at the time had I had more hours in the day. So it's been wonderful to do that. And it was all based on sketches. You know, these are a couple of sketches I had of him from the time, but there's another sketch in Queens, and there were a couple of other drawings as well. And then the last one was this chap, Sainsbury, Chris Sainsbury. He's, I mean, kind of a family friend, or a friend of my father's really, but we knew him quite well. And I did the drawing, which the drawing is the next one. The drawing was done in Paris at the same time, you know, when I was there in 2012. We were there for sort of 3 months or so. And Chris, who by that time was living in the provinces, came through and you know, stayed with us for a couple of days. And that was that really. I'll just show you again. But I mean, a wonderful face, and you know, a great guy to paint. So it's been a strange time, you know, this second lockdown, coming back to these sort of three faces from the past who've, you know, in a small or large way, have had quite an effect on me. And thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. That was really interesting. Again, last chance for anyone if you want to put any comments or questions in the chat. So that's just about wrapped up. I'm so grateful to all four of you for sharing with us some of your work practice, a sneak peek of your studios, and for just taking the time to get all this done tonight. I have to say I'm in awe of some of the work that we've seen. It's really fascinating, and it's really interesting to see some of the thoughts and techniques behind what you're all doing. All these artists' work and many other pieces can be seen in the RSA Annual Exhibition, which is on the website royalscottishacademy.org.uk until the end of May. And you can also find links there to it's under the past digital events, where we've got all the previous artist events that we've shown, if you want to have a look at that. I hope you'll join us for the next Open Studios 4, which is based on sculpture, and we're delighted that Kenny Hunter will be hosting that one. So all I need to do is say thank you so much to all you for taking part and spending the time with us tonight. Sheena and the other members of the RSA staff who've worked so hard behind the scenes to get this event on track. A special sneak thank you to my neighbour who's let me use her dye shed because I've got no internet at home at the moment. And of course, many thanks to all of you at home watching this. And thanks for your continued support so that we can make these events possible. And I hope you have a good evening, and thank you very much.
And thank you, Charlie, for chairing tonight's event.